roll their eyes in this room because they've heard me say this a lot, but Kazakhstan's got 40% of the uranium on planet Earth. The United States still imports 20% of its uranium, its fuel rods for nuclear power from Russia. So there's an obvious opportunity here to use America's interest and advantage in trying to help Kazakhstan find a role in a post-carbon economy based on the resources that it has. Where is U.S. policy on helping them get more involved in the fuel cycle for nuclear power stations across the world?
Great question, Gavin. Which again, I plead non-expertise in this area, but I know a little bit about some of the conversations that we've had. As you stated, Kazakhstan currently does not enrich or process uranium at all.
They are a denuclearized country.
Yes, and so what they export is the yellow cake or whatever, the natural uranium. And yeah, they are, I think, right now, they are the #1 exporter of uranium in the world, and I think they are #2 in reserves or something in the world. I don't know who #1 is actually, but
They're #1.
in reserves too? Oh, okay. But,
Maybe up there.
yeah, but in any case, they they have their own domestic reasons why the enrichment and processing is not an obvious thing to do or an easy thing to do politically, and that they're also running into that with opening a nuclear power plant, which they've been talking about for years and have actually, in the last 2 years, actually solicited bids from companies in China, France, South Korea, and Russia to build that. But in that same speech I referred to earlier, Tokayev's speech in September, where he laid out the economic reforms, he also announced in that speech that they're going to hold a referendum on whether to build the plant or not, which really kind of took some people aback. But I believe it's partly a way of drawing out the process a little bit, because I don't think the government's quite ready to make the decision of what it wants to do. But that's a separate issue in a way from your question about the nuclear fuel cycle and what the policy is on allowing Kazakhstan to do that. I mean, the U.S. is grappling with its own set of issues around how we get the uranium we need for our own plants. And right now, we're still very dependent on Russian fuel that's at least processed in Russia. Some of that is,
Right.
Kazakh uranium that's processed in Russia. And I don't think my understanding is we have not figured out our own plan yet for how we're going to achieve this, sufficiency, or I don't know if self-sufficiency is the right word, but without depending on Russia. And that's partly why, for example, Rosatom has not been sanctioned yet. So it's all kind of linked together. So Kazakhstan wants to know whether Rosatom's going to be sanctioned, because if they are, they don't necessarily want to sign a contract with them to build a nuclear plant. We can't tell them yet because we don't know ourselves, because we're trying to sort out our own supply situation. And if Kazakhstan was already processing and enriching uranium and making fuel rods or whatever, that we could then, that could be our alternative, but they're not. So yeah, so it's a real conundrum inside a riddle, inside a dilemma, or whatever, one of those things. But the one thing I will say is that Kazakhstan's very interested in exploring the small modular reactors that the U.S. is the leading maker of now, although it's a new technology and still unproven. And that tells me that they definitely want nuclear power in their energy mix, and B, that they're recognizing the liabilities they face with Rosatom, and they're looking for alternatives. But it's a tricky mess right now. But actually, maybe to end on a more positive note, I agree with you that it's a great opportunity in terms of developing our commercial relationship with Kazakhstan, and also maybe developing the middle corridor as a route for getting that uranium to market. So that's all.
Fair enough. That's a lot to choose from.
Ambassador, as you know, for ExxonMobil, continues to remain concerned about the Caspian pipeline and the security of that route, which obviously takes, I think it's about 80% of Kazakhstan's oil outside of the country, going through Russian territory through the Black Sea. So we continue to see that as a concern. I'm curious if you see anything has changed in the last 6 months, or how do you see things moving forward? And corollary to that, obviously there have been additional strikes in Mangistau and other regions in western Kazakhstan. Just curious if you see that getting worse, getting better, or if there's any progress on that front.
Okay. On the CPC, things seem to have stabilized to some degree, and we haven't had a repeat of these, technical shutdowns that were suspiciously timed, back in 2022, it's maybe it's the lull before the storm, but and I think, well, you can say, speak to this better than I can, but I think from the perspective of the big oil companies, the problems with suppliers and contractors have also gotten better. For those who don't know, a lot of the people providing products and services to keep the CPC pipeline running were sort of staying away or doing hands-off because they were afraid of the sanctions risk, and we had to do a lot of massaging and reassuring that they would not be violating sanctions by doing it. So that's all good. The one wild card that came in about 6 months ago, now that you say 6 months, was the attacks in Novorossiysk, the Ukrainian attacks on naval ships in Novorossiysk, which of course is the port where the CPC ends and the oil is taken off. And there was a lot of concern on the part of our commercial partners that was going to be very disruptive to the trade. But again, that seems to have stabilized too. So, but that could become an issue again. Obviously, it's still a war zone essentially. On the labor situation and strikes and so on in western Kazakhstan, yeah, there have been a few things cropping up recently. No one that I talked to and the folks on our team at the embassy sees this as the start of like a bigger wave or something that's going to become intensify over the winter. But of course I wouldn't say we have perfect insight into what's actually happening in Mangistau and in Atarau and so on by any means. But that right now there's not a lot of a concern that this is going to become like a series of protests that might lead to something like January 2022.
Thanks.
So we've got time for a couple of more questions.
Just one over here.
Please.
Atlantic Eurasia Business Council. Ambassador, 25 years ago in fall 1998, another kind of challenging time, you presented for us in Philadelphia. 25 years from now, what you can think about some most challenging things and some possible achievements in Kazakhstan?
Whoa. First of all, I remember going the trip to Pennsylvania. Thank you for reminding me. It's been a while since I thought about that. That was my earliest days at the State Department. Well, 25 years from now, I can safely predict that I will not be working on Central Asia policy. Not that that's going to change things in the region in one way or the other, but that's one thing I know for sure. Yeah, I hesitate to make predictions, especially that far off. Because it's that far off, my inclination is to be optimistic. I'm a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist, because I do believe that fundamentally Kazakhstan and the rest of Central Asia has tremendous potential to develop its human resources and its natural resources in a way that will benefit not only those countries but the broader region. And if only the external environment allows it, that it can be a very prosperous and stable place in 25 years. But that caveat is an important one. And I'm just not sure, given what we've seen over the last 2 years from their northern neighbor, that's why I won't predict with any certainty. So that's the best I can do right now.
Any other hands? Please.
I was wondering if you could give us an update on the status of Chinese investment and trade flows in Kazakhstan, especially after the Xi'an summit in May, and then Tokayev's recent statements about ancient hatred should deter or define our relations with outside powers, which is not a nod towards China. And this is Wesley from Caspian, or from the International Tax Investment Center.
Okay. So yeah, I don't have the figures in front of me, but I know I actually had a meeting with the Chinese ambassador for the first time since my tenure there. I want to say it was about 3 months ago or something, 3 or 4 months ago, and he was at the time, crowing about the trade numbers, the trade figures. I want to say they're going to hit 30 billion in bilateral trade this year, or something like that, which is 10 times our trade, which is not surprising. Obviously, it's a neighbor and has a lot at stake there. But I think there's been, like, Russia, China have been going back and forth as 1-2 trading partners, and in 2021 and 2022, Russia was bigger, but it's quite possible that China will overtake in 2023, as far as I understand. So there's a lot going on there. They just in Xi'an at this Belt and Road Summit, was it an anniversary or a summit? I don't remember what it was, but this meeting that happened, they did sign an agreement. They signed a number of agreements, but one of them was also about opening a new border crossing north of the two major ones that exist now in Dostik and at Horgos. And I know from the Kazakh side, they talked a lot about being happy and proud that they achieved that, and they think it's important. I think it's one of the interesting things is if you look at the location of this border crossing, and I'm blanking on the name of the city. They express it in terms of the cities on the Kazakh side and on the Chinese side, and I can't remember now what that is. That it actually would connect into the railroad networks on the Kazakh side that lead then to the northern route into Russia. So that is not compatible with the idea of developing the middle corridor and the Trans-Caspian, because it doesn't make any sense to send things across that border or that crossing if you're going to go into the middle corridor. But in any case, so the Kazakhs are sort of bullish on economic relations with China. They are not as exposed or as vulnerable, arguably, as other Central Asian countries, because they haven't taken on nearly as much Chinese debt. I mean, if you look at the percent, I think it's less than 5% of their overall external debt is Chinese. Whereas, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan is much, much higher. They don't see any limits, I guess you could say, on developing that, except that there's a kind of base level of concern about not becoming too dependent on any one partner or any one neighbor, and that's going to apply to China too. So they'll keep this multi-vectoral approach and diversified approach, but China is going to be a growing economic partner, no question.
So at the risk of overstaying my welcome and asking you questions, one quick question.
Wait, how could you overstay your welcome
I
here?
worry that I'm abusing your generosity. We're keeping you from your vacation. You talked about strategic minerals and the bounty that Kazakhstan has. I know the U.S. Geological Survey has done some work there. I guess the question is, it's expensive to move unrefined minerals, no matter how strategic they are, long distances to the United States. I mean, does the U.S. really have a strategic interest? And if so, how do we realize that with Kazakhstan?
Well, I do think we have a strategic interest, and we've expressed that to the Kazakhs. Excuse me. Hold on a second. But you're right that from an economics point of view, bringing the minerals from Kazakhstan to the United States is not simple, and the Kazakhs are very interested in developing the value chain, going up the value chain with minerals as well. So the investments they're looking for from U.S. and other companies, other foreign companies, they want to add on to the investment deals some technologies involving processing. And so, for example, one of the first U.S. companies to get into the market last year, is called Cove Capital. And Cove Capital has been given several, I can't remember what they call them, blocks, I guess, that they bid on to develop for certain critical minerals in Kazakhstan. And then the Kazakhs approached them, came back to them and said, we would, in addition to exploring these territories and possibly extracting the minerals, we would also like you to come in on a deal for this major processing facility in another part of Kazakhstan. So this seems to be their approach. And I think under those terms, there's potential for other U.S. companies to get involved. I was in Arizona about 4 weeks ago. For those who don't know, Arizona has a special relationship with Kazakhstan that goes back 30 years. The State National Guard in Arizona has this regular mill-to-mill engagement, and it's sister cities, and it's expanded. I think earlier I was talking about the University of Arizona, and so at many levels that exists. So that's why I went to Arizona. But when I was there, I did a roundtable with businesses, including the large mining company, Freeport-McMoRan, and other mining companies, and there was a lot of interest. I was actually blown away by the level of specificity of their questions, which indicated to me that they really want to explore the market in Kazakhstan. So anyway, I see potential there despite the difficulties.
All right, fair enough. So we have a question from the internet. I was going to ask this one earlier, but I figured it was going to get asked in the room, so we'll go to the internet for it. What can the United States do to assist Kazakhstan and to develop this middle corridor?
So the key challenge to develop the middle corridor and make it a viable alternative is to increase the speed of goods moving and to lower the costs. Obviously, those are the two elements to make it competitive. And that will require the countries of the region cooperating and harmonizing their standards and their procedures for the movement of goods. So other than encouraging that to happen, which we have been doing and will continue to do, and sometimes even, maybe brokering some, not maybe brokering is the wrong word, but encouraging countries to talk to each other to reach the necessary agreements. That's really the countries of the region that have to do that. So, and it's primarily Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and to some extent Turkey that have to reach those agreements. But what we can do is work on the infrastructure that's necessary to also facilitate the movement of goods. And there's hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. There was for those who obsessively follow the region, you might have seen this already, but the EBRD did a study back in June. They released it in June of this year on how to make the middle corridor economically competitive, and they identified 40 projects, 33 hard infrastructure, ports, railroads, roads, other things related to actual tangible hard infrastructure, and 7 soft infrastructure projects. We are already working on some of the 7 through some of our technical assistance projects. USAID and also CLDP, our Commercial Law Development Program, Commerce Department, is engaged on those things. On the hard infrastructure, there's a lot of interest on the part of the international financial institutions. Of course, we're voting members, so we can encourage those and push for those. And also the European Union has a huge interest and stake in that. The EU is hosting a conference in late January in Brussels. They're calling it an investors forum for the Middle Corridor, or maybe for, they have a different term they call it global gateway.
Yeah.
And they have this thing which you know has resources behind it, but I think it's Middle Corridor in this case. And the U.S. will be there, will be sitting, you know, as participating in that forum. And the hope is that countries will actually make pledges towards specific projects at that event. And then finally, I'll mention, I don't remember if I said this earlier, because just before I came here, I did another roundtable at the US-Kazakhstan Business Council. So I may not have said this here, but did I mention Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment? Okay, so I did PGI. So PGII is also, you know, as I said earlier, is committed to marshaling resources to support infrastructure on the Middle Corridor.
I would just note the World Bank study was great, talking about crossing the Caspian and whatnot, but actually all of its work was focused on Central Asia proper and really didn't get across the water.
Yeah, well, so actually there are two studies I didn't mention. So the first one was not World Bank, it was EBRD, but World Bank also did a study that's more recent, and I think they looked at the whole thing. And actually, I haven't read the World Bank one yet. I did read the EBRD one, but I'm told that it's a little less bullish on the prospects for the competitiveness of the Middle Corridor than the EBRD one is, but I don't know why, but in any case.
That's grist for your next talk here in Washington, on your next visit. I'd like to thank you for coming and speaking with us, Ambassador Rosenblum. Always insightful and always useful for all of us. Thank you, and bon voyage for your vacation.
Thank you. Thank you all.